Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti Regional Chamber Virtual Luncheon with special guest U.S. Senator Gary Peters. During this afternoon's presentation, please feel free to submit questions using the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation, time permitting. So with that housekeeping out of the way, I would like to introduce from the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti Regional Chamber, Mr. Andy Labar. Andy?
Nathan, thank you so much, and thank you to Butzel Long, our host here today for our tele-headline lunch. I want to thank Senator Peters for being with us very much. He was scheduled to present at a traditional in-person headline lunch actually on this date, and so we appreciate he and his team working to make this work in the new format. I'm going to introduce Claudia Rast from Butzel Long here in just a moment, but a quick note on format. After remarks from Claudia and then an introduction of Senator Peters, we will hear the senator's remarks, and when he finishes, we'll move into Q&A. I will read those questions and he'll respond. And then right around 1:40, 1:45, we'll hear from our president and CEO, Diane Keller. And again, thank you to Butzel Long both for being our host and the use of their great technology. We are not able to do what we do as the chamber without the support of our members, and Butzel Long is a fantastic member. And here with us today is Claudia Rast. Claudia is a shareholder based in the Butzel Long Ann Arbor office, and she is the practice department chair of the Intellectual Property, Cybersecurity, and Emerging Technology Group. Claudia, welcome.
Andy, thank you, and good afternoon to all of you listening in and watching Senator Peters. On behalf of the law firm of Butzel Long, we're pleased to sponsor this webinar featuring the U.S. Senator. We had hoped, obviously, to make all this happen with a live luncheon, so needless to say, this is a bit of a first for the chamber as we test these digital waters. So thank you for your patience and willingness to take this inaugural leap with us. I'm here to say a few words about Butzel Long, but I know that you're anxious to hear from the senators, so I'll be brief. First, Butzel Long has been around a long time, 166 years to be exact, and our history parallels Michigan's early manufacturing roots. While our attorneys cover all the traditional practice areas that you would expect in a large firm, like corporate, finance, litigation, labor, employment, trade, immigration, intellectual property, estate, tax, planning, media, employee benefits, real estate, and more, we also enjoy national reputations in newer legal areas and emerging technologies such as mobility or autonomous and connected vehicles, the security challenges with IoT or the Internet of Things, the evolving standards in privacy and security, digital currency, sophisticated forensic cyber counseling when companies fall victim to hackers, and of course, even cannabis law. Second, and perhaps more importantly today, these are challenging times for us all. As a firm, we are of course committed to serving our clients, but we also serve the wider communities in which we live and work. And to this end, we have made available a wide array of legal bulletins, 88 to be exact as of this morning, and a dozen webinars addressing both the federal and state legal impacts surrounding COVID-19 legislation and executive orders. These are all freely available on our website at butzel.com. Finally, while our experience and reach is international, with clients across the globe, we are also firmly planted in our downtown Ann Arbor office and are pleased to count as clients many members of the Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti communities. With that, I thank you for your attention, and I'll turn the mic back over to Andy.
Claudia, thank you. Thank you again to Butzel Long for all their help today and for the chamber membership. It is now my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, the United States Senator Gary Peters. Senator Peters is a lifelong resident here in the state of Michigan. He's a Navy veteran, and he is wrapping up his first term in the United States Senate, having first been elected in 2014. Prior to his service in the Senate, he served 3 terms in the United States House of Representatives. And in the Senate, Senator Peters is on some really important committees. Those include the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, the Joint Economic Committee, and he serves as the ranking member of the Senate Homeland Security and government affairs committee. Senator Peters, welcome. Thank you for being with us. And I turn the virtual floor over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Andy. Thank you for the warm introduction, and Butzel Long for sponsoring this, and certainly appreciate all the members of the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti Regional Chamber part of today's webinar. I really wish I was having lunch with you and could be with all of you personally and have that kind of interaction. We all miss those days, and hopefully we'll be getting back to those days in the very near future. But this is a great opportunity for me to hear from you, hopefully answer some of your questions. Love to hear your comments as well as we get through what's a very difficult and challenging time. And I thought I'd spend a little bit of time talking about just kind of the highlights of the CARES Act. We also are in the process of hopefully passing another piece of legislation perhaps tomorrow is what we're looking at to continue to build on the work that we did in the CARES Act. So I'll give a little bit of update related to that. But as Andy mentioned, I am the ranking member on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, meaning I'm the top Democrat, work closely with the Republican chair. The two of us oversee that committee. And that committee is particularly relevant to what we're doing here. Homeland Security oversees FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management folks who are in charge of the overall federal response for the COVID-19. I am on the telephone with them every day, with the director, regional directors, administrators. My staff, my committee staff works closely with them and is an interface between the governor's office and FEMA as we work to provide critical resources for us here in Michigan. I will tell you, we still have significant challenges we're trying to overcome. And first and foremost, right now, or I should say we got tied, but probably still at the top of the list, is making sure we're getting the personal protection equipment delivered to Michigan and to our hospitals and healthcare facilities to protect both patients as well as the workers. We want to make sure our doctors and nurses, medical tech folks, everybody in the hospital system have the personal protection that they need to stay healthy. We need them to stay healthy. There are heroes helping folks who are ill, and we need to keep them healthy because we can't replace them. We need to have them on the front lines constantly, and I want to do everything we can to support that. We've made headway in that area, but it's a challenge, and this is certainly one thing that this crisis has clearly demonstrated, is that we have a supply chain that is highly dependent on other countries providing critical medical supplies. And when we're in a pandemic and those countries need those medical supplies in their own country, it puts us in a very precarious situation. We're seeing that not just with personal protection equipment, but with some critical supplies for testing. There's no question we need to aggressively ramp up testing. We have to know who's sick and who's not. As we have discussions about reopening the economy and moving forward, dependent on that and the speed by which you can do it is the level of testing that you can accomplish. Strides have been made, but there is a lot more to do in that area. So I'd be happy to discuss or answer any questions related to that and the work that I do in Homeland Security. Let me just briefly touch on CARES and then what we're looking at hopefully passing tomorrow. The CARES Act, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, but is over $2 trillion of federal aid to deal with the simultaneous healthcare crisis with the economic crisis that comes with it. From the healthcare perspective, over $150 billion is provided to our hospitals and medical facilities. They are in serious financial situation given the fact that they're now not doing a lot of the procedures that they normally do as they convert beds to COVID patients. Those beds and normal procedures pay most of the bills. Things like hip replacements, which are really important for folks. Those have all been delayed, but hip replacements help pay for a lot of the bills around the hospital. That's not happening. And so we need to make sure we're helping hospitals get through this tough time. In particular, I'm concerned about our rural hospitals who are also having challenges. The other aspect of the act, which I focused on a great deal, dealt with making sure people have the resources they need to get through this very difficult time. That means making sure money is going to those who are unemployed and to do it quickly. Actually, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Act is a bill that I wrote and sponsored. That bill is in the CARES Act, and what that does is it expands eligibility for unemployment broader than people who would normally get unemployment, including small business owners, the folks who are members of the chamber here, if you are finding yourself without an income, especially if you're an independent contractor, gig economy, freelance worker, you can now apply for unemployment insurance. And that unemployment will also be enhanced. That amount's going to be enhanced by $600 a week for the next four months. It also includes increased money for work share programs, which is through the state of Michigan. Many of you may be familiar. If you have employees, you want to keep them on the payroll, but you don't need them, for example, to work for 40 hours, but you need them for 10 hours. They can still apply for unemployment and get the additional 30 hours of coverage, which will help keep them in a situation where they can put food on the table and still be part of your effort. We'll be looking at that closely. The amount of numbers right now are dramatic. In talking to the unemployment folks here in Michigan, I believe right now they have 1,150,000 people who have applied for unemployment in Michigan. That represents roughly 23% of the workforce in our state is unemployed. Those are depression type levels of unemployment. Basically, the last 10 years of job growth disappeared in 1 month. And hopefully we can get those folks back into the job market once we move forward. And I'll be happy to talk about that. The other one that I know a lot of folks here on the call are concerned about and want to make sure that the money is available is our Paycheck Protection Plan through the 7A loans, expanded 7A loans. That was $350 billion with forgivable loans for people who keep their employees on the payroll. As you know, that money has now all been spent. We're in the process of increasing that amount. There is a proposal that's being negotiated as we speak. We were hoping to possibly put the finishing touches on it today. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. It's now been pushed to tomorrow, and I hope we get it done sooner rather than later. And what that program, at least 10, and this is all tentative, so don't quote me on this right now, but right now about an additional $250 billion will be put into the 7A loans and the Paycheck Protection Plan. Also looking at perhaps around an additional 120 billion on top of that for emergency assistance, the EIDL plan, which is emergency injury assistance, which is a very quick payment to a company of $10,000 to help up front, plus additional loans that will be available. It's an area that I've been personally pushing on. I want to make sure that those businesses that have been the hardest hit actually get money. I'm concerned that some of the folks who got the money up front were folks who had longstanding relationships with the bank and may have been at the front of the line. And I understand that happens, but I want to make sure that folks who also may not have those relationships, maybe a smaller customer, certainly very hit in a major way, they need their money as well to get through this crisis. There's no way we come out of this if we lose our small businesses in our state. They're the engine of growth. So we're going to be working aggressively to make sure that's part of it. This additional bill will also likely have money for hospitals. They're going to need more resources to get through this troubling time. We're working on that, which will likely be in it. The other part that'll be in it will be additional funding for testing, as I mentioned earlier, as to why testing is so important, and we want to make sure we're putting the money into the system necessary to scale up the test. Right now, the challenge for test is not the lab capacity, and we want to keep expanding that, but that's there. The problem is with the test kits, with the things as simple as swabs, so you can take a sample. There's only one manufacturer in the United States that makes swabs. All of the other manufacturing is done overseas. We have to step up production here in the United States. I would hope, and I've been pushing the administration to use the Defense Production Act to get that kind of production up so that we can provide the swabs necessary for the testing. And the other aspect are the reagents that you use in order to do the testing. So that's been the hang up. We want to provide additional resources and additional push to get that going. And that's going to be part of the bill that will, again, hopefully pass this week. So with that, I think I'll stop and happy to take your questions and comments. And again, thank you for being here today on the webinar.
Senator, thank you. And just for the folks listening in, you can ask questions. There's a question panel on your Q screen here. One question that's come in, Senator, is do you know if anything is being done either directly in law or within any department through regulations to help our college students and young people generally, either with internships or summer employment. Do you know if anything is going on that issue?
There isn't anything specifically on that. There is help for students or students who are former students with their student loans, if they have federal loans, so that will be provided to help them. They don't have to make payments through September. There is money, though, that is being provided to the universities as part of the CARE Act and the colleges. And some of those money is to help students get through this rough time. So there is appropriations related to that in the initial bill in the CARES Act. So that the colleges can be spent on a variety of emergency help for those students, which would include things like making sure that they can stay enrolled in the fall. So I would encourage students to reach out to their institution, to their college or university, and find out what sort of steps that university is taking to help students be able to continue their education. And again, that's part of the CARES, the original CARES Act, but we're certainly continuing to think about how we make sure that students can do that, and if there are going to be any additional needs in what will be, I'm sure we're going to continue to see future versions of this kind of assistance going forward, but it's not in the one for this week, but there is money available from the last one.
And Senator, perhaps broadly, do you think we need to be flexible in the general ways in which we provide educational services here in the next 6 months to a year or so forth?
Yeah, we will have to have, I think, flexibility. I mean, one thing that we're seeing right now, of course, is that the universities have been going to more online instruction to keep people safe. And I will say that actually additional resources were put into the original CARES Act to deal with online assistance as well, because we're finding, and I've heard, I've been on calls with universities and community colleges across the state, that as they've been moving to the online delivery, many students simply don't have the devices or the computers to be able to access some of those online services. So there are resources that have been allocated and have are being distributed to institutions of higher education to make sure that they can get online. But you'll likely see some of that. I've been in the process right now of talking to some of those universities. I was talking to an administrator, one of the community college, looking at the fall. They think that they haven't made the call yet. I think some have made the call that they're moving to more online instruction, but some things are really tough to do online. So those are like laboratories. So obviously laboratories, you can still do online, but it's a lot better to have people in the labs. And I know they're working on protocols as to how can they continue to offer that kind of instruction, but do it in the safest way possible. But flexibility will be the key.
Great. Senator, one question that's come in is, have there been discussions to push mortgage companies and other loan companies to pause collection and just extend the length at the back end?
There have been those discussions, and that does happen with federal loans. If you have a federal loan, FHA loans and others, that those are being paused. And there's also a federal moratorium through May 18th for at least foreclosures. So folks can't make those payments. They can't be foreclosed on and kicked out of their house during that time frame. However, I know a number of banks and others are making some of those arrangements. I was recently on a call with folks with the Bankers Association here in Michigan, and I know a number of institutions are figuring out ways that they can work with our customers or members in the case of credit unions.
Thank you. Another question, Senator, is there has been a lot of attention regarding the speed with which the PPP Parent Protection Plan funds have been spent. How can we, both as individuals and organizations, help push lend to small and independent businesses? This is a question we get a lot. There's fantastic restaurants in the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti area, community institutions, anything we can do to encourage banks to make sure to lend to those unique businesses.
Well, I think that's critically important. I mentioned in my comments that I'm concerned, and I'm waiting to get more information from the SBA. I've also asked the General Accounting Office to be able to give us a better sense of who has received these loans and the size of the companies. And I would suspect that folks who have more vigorous banking relationship with a bank were likely to have gotten those loans first. Part of it because all that information was there and they've dealt with the bank. But I'm not saying that they don't need the funds. I'm sure they need the funds as well. But I'm really concerned about the folks who may not have had that kind of close relationship. Their application was in the process of being worked on, and then the money ran out. And that's why we have to appropriate additional money, why that's a major focus of mine. But I also want to make sure that it's getting to those entities that are most in need. We're trying to put some of that criteria in this bill right now. That's where part of the negotiations are, is how do we ensure that? That's why the EIDL program that I mentioned for emergency assistance is particularly focused on those very small businesses who need immediate cash right now. It's emergency. That money went very, very quickly. That's why I'm encouraged that at least to where we are in negotiations right now, it'll be part of $120 billion that will be focused on those smaller businesses, minority businesses as well, which we want to make sure get the resources that they need to get through this. The other aspect that I think is very important, and would hope the Chamber would help make sure that you're helping your nonprofit members as well. That's a lot of nonprofit groups don't normally engage with the Small Business Administration or the 7A loans, for example. And yet nonprofits qualify for this money as well to keep their employees employed and to keep their services. And I think we all agree during what we're dealing with right now means our nonprofits are more important than ever, but they're certainly strained like everyone else. Their donations are going to drop because people are concerned about their own individual future right now. And we want to make sure that they have access to those funds as well.
Senator, one of the questions that came in actually while you were speaking about it was related to PPP, and basically if there's an additional appropriation of 125 or 250 billion, given the speed with which the first tranche was used up, do you think that will be enough money, or is there any planning on that in terms of how to match capacity with need?
Well, we're working with the Department of Treasury on that as well. We hope that this will make a significant step forward to help those businesses, but that's always under constant evaluation. But if you look, and again, this isn't bill they're still working on the bill, still negotiating. So I want to be careful about some of these numbers because I've been around long enough to know things can change pretty rapidly. But if it's the 250 billion on top of 350 billion, that's 600 billion there. And then if there's more money to help the EIDL accounts and others, you may be approaching 700 billion. And you're starting to get up to the numbers that we saw in the recovery back in 2008. I mean, it's a substantial amount of money that's being put out into the economy. But we're certainly committed. I'm certainly committed to making sure that our small businesses survive this. They have to. And so we're going to continue to reassess where we are and act as quickly as possible.
We will hold off until we see what's both passed and signed into law then, if we're hearing you correctly.
Right, yes. And again, hopefully that'll happen. We'll have a package hopefully as early as tomorrow.
Great. I will put in another question, Senator, that's come in. As I do that, though, thank you for your comment about the nonprofit community. We have a wide range of nonprofit members, and out of pure self-interest, anything you can do to help other C6 organizations like the Chamber be applicable, we appreciate that at the staff level.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I appreciate that, and we've been working to get that. The services you provide are critical, obviously, and especially trying to navigate the complexity of what we're dealing with right now. So I'm fully aware of that, and we're making efforts to be helpful if we can.
Thank you. One question that came in is just in terms of planning for the future. what is your most up-to-date understanding of the possibility of a COVID resurgence and sort of the plans from a governmental level in terms of how we can best prepare for a resurgence and adapt to the way we do things?
Well, I think we have. That's why we have to be very careful as we move forward with starting to open the economy. I mean, we all know that has to happen in the long term. You can't keep sheltering in place and having businesses closed. That's not sustainable in the long term. And everybody wants to start seeing us moving in a way that we can start opening businesses safely, which has got to be the primary criteria. So we'll be working closely with public health officials. I'm regularly talking to epidemiologists and folks in public health as to how do we move forward and do that in a safe way. Working closely with the governor's office. I know the governor is formulating some plans right now that she's going to be announcing shortly, I believe, as to kind of how we move forward. But I think to step back to answer your question, the one thing we have learned in looking at how other countries have responded to this pandemic, there are lessons learned. There are good practices and bad practices. One good practice we know is that the more aggressive you are upfront in slowing down the spread of the disease, the more options you have at the other side. This disease, it spreads very rapidly. It's highly contagious, and it can expand at an exponential rate. And what we know is if you're not very strong and very aggressive up front, the virus will get ahead of you. And when the virus gets ahead of you, it's really hard to catch up. So you have to try to stay ahead of it. The good news is we're seeing that the curve flattening, and the curve means that we can't overwhelm our healthcare facilities. If you overwhelm your healthcare facilities, you have to make some really tough choices. And we've seen that in places like Italy, where people have to make life and death decisions when someone comes into the hospital, when we want to be able to treat everybody to the best of our abilities through the system. So having the spike now appears, and it still appears. So this is something that changes. I think all of your members appreciate changes on a daily basis. Although it's encouraging right now, we'll have to see a few more days if that is occurring. And then we're going to be in this balance phase as to knowing that once you start opening some stuff up, you're likely to see increased spreading of the disease as well. So how do you kind of find that kind of balance? The one advantage going forward that we didn't have in the past is that the supply chain is really starting to gear up right now with more testing, with more personal protection equipment, things like ventilators. I mean, one thing that is so encouraging to me is you're seeing companies all across Michigan step up and starting to make products that they don't normally make, but they're doing it because the country needs them. You think of our big three automakers, but all of the auto suppliers and companies that are not in the auto industry but still make stuff. That's what we do in Michigan. We know how to make things. And they're making these supplies, and they're making them potentially in very, very large volumes, but it takes some time. And so if you can approach this in a cautious, safe way and start opening up, should there be a surge at some point, if that happens, we'll be in a better position to deal with it than we were when we first went into this.
And Senator, just to piggyback on that, I know there's been discussion, especially within this last week, about the pace at which you reopen the economy and the pace at which you do it in accordance with the wisest public health advice. Is it still your understanding that it will be decisions left up to the states through their governors and their public health apparatus rather than something being either suggested or tried to be implemented from the federal level?
Well, I suspect you'll continue to get suggestions from the federal level, but you should approach it as suggestions. Ultimately, it is up to the governors. Our federal system is pretty clear that it's the governors that are responsible directly for the health, welfare, and safety of their residents, and they're going to make those kinds of determinations on a state-by-state basis. In a lot of respects, that makes sense because every state is different. Every state is dealing with a different set of circumstances, and our governors need to make a decision again based on good advice and science as to what's best for the folks in that individual state. But where the federal role is, and I can't stress this enough, the federal we have to see more coming out of the federal government in coordinating the purchase and acquisition of critical supplies. That's why I've been pushing the administration aggressively to use the Defense Production Act. The Defense Production Act is something that was created back during the Korean War to deal with wartime mobilization. If you go to war, you have to start asking and telling manufacturers and companies to start making critical war material. We're in that kind of situation. We need to be going out and getting manufacturers to make this stuff, and they're not making it for free. I mean, what the federal government does is that they will request a particular product to be made. They will enter into a long-term contract, and they will guarantee that every bit of it is actually purchased. So there's not risk for the company, but they're being instructed that we need face masks, for example. We need surgical masks to be made, but we'll buy as many huge amounts. We're going to need huge amounts of face masks, not just for protecting our healthcare professionals, but you're going to need people in our factories and in our stores, and consumers are going to want to wear them. You know, ultimately, the ultimate decision as to the opening of the economy really rests with individual people, and the American public has to feel comfortable. If they're not feeling comfortable, they're not going to go out and patronize places. So we've got to make sure people have access to the best information possible to make an informed decision for themselves, and the personal protection equipment to protect themselves and the people they come in contact with. We know the main beneficiary of wearing a mask are the people you come in contact with. And just in case you're an asymptomatic person or with an asymptomatic case, you could still be spreading the virus and not know it. And you're actually protecting other people when you wear the mask. You're telling other people, I care about your health. I'm going to do everything I can to protect you.
Thank you, Senator. Another question that's come in, building on the issues of federalism you just mentioned, is there anything that can happen at the federal level to help speed up the processing of unemployment and PUA applications at the state level?
Well, we did in the CARES Act, we appropriated a substantial amount of money to help states get the money out as quickly as possible. But it is an absolutely overwhelming task. As I mentioned in my opening comments, as of last week, I think this is last Thursday, is the most up-to-date number that I have. The state was processing or had applications for 1,135,000 people, I believe. So, you know, close, approaching probably now, they're probably at 1.2 million. That's a massive amount. When you consider that the unemployment agency in Michigan prior to COVID-19 was processing somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 1,000 applications a week, and then suddenly had to process 300,000 a week. And at the same time, you were closing face-to-face offices and everybody was working remotely and via phone, made that a logistical nightmare. As of what I was told for last week on Thursday, of the 1.1 million, 750,000 people were getting their checks. There was a little bit of a slowdown with folks who are part of the pandemic assistance, which I mentioned, which I was part of writing. Those are the small businesses, the folks who were independent contractors, part of the gig economy. Some of them applied right away before the Department of Labor actually had time to write the guidance. So they were initially rejected because the guidance hadn't changed. That's now in place, and they're reprocessing those. And based on the information I received from the state, I think they believe around 200,000 of those folks should start getting their check sometime this week. So process is being made. It's still not there. We have provided substantial federal money to help, and hopefully some long-term upgrades in these systems as well. The one challenge we knew going into this is that most of the unemployment systems all across the country were antiquated and were simply not up to a monumental task. But again, put it in perspective, we saw unemployment filings in 1 month equal to all of the jobs created over the last 10 years.
Thank you. And Senator, for the benefit of our listeners here, I do want to say many questions have come in and are coming in related to the PPP, which you addressed earlier, and specifically some of the efforts that you're putting in to make sure that money gets to those small and independent businesses, those cornerstone businesses we have here in Ann Arbor and Ipsy. We will make this town hall available via recording, so folks can hear the senator's earlier remarks on that. Senator, a question that's come in is, do you know of any sort of plan to try and package some of the lessons learned from this type of pandemic so that we can be perhaps better prepared either for a resurgence or, God forbid, a future pandemic of some sort?
Oh, there's no question. There's going to be a lot of lessons learned, and we will do extensive hearings on that. The committee that I'm the ranking member of, Homeland Security, it's Homeland Security and Government Affairs, which means we're the top oversight committee for the U.S. Senate. There's going to be a lot of oversight that we'll look at, actually also with the response from how was the money spent. Was it spent accordingly? Was it spent, hopefully minimize fraud or abuse, or making sure the money actually went to who it was intended to? In fact, some of the oversight provisions, the pandemic oversight panel, were provisions that I put in working with the Republican chair of my committee, instructing both inspector generals as well as the GAO to make sure we're looking at how this money was spent, and are there lessons learned as to the future, as to how money should be allocated and what sort of criteria should be put in place. But it's also the broader oversight that we're going to do beyond just the accountability of the money, and that's how do we adequately prepare for pandemics. Unfortunately, some of the key folks related to pandemics over the last couple of years, this current administration eliminated those positions, so we weren't as well prepared as we were in the past where we had those positions. I'm supporting legislation to make sure pandemic coordination is part of the National Security Council. This is clearly a national security issue. I had a hearing on this actually last year as well in my work in the Armed Services Committee. I'm the ranking member of Emerging Threats Subcommittee. In that committee, we are concerned about bioterrorism and how do we deal with a bioterrorist attack. And it was clear that we have to be better prepared to deal with these kinds of contingencies. The one thing about a pandemic, and we have the resurgence that we have to worry about and we need to be prepared for, and that could be more immediate. But the one thing we know throughout human history, there have been pandemics throughout human history. They're not going to go away. We're going to have them again, and we have to be better prepared next time. And one of the best ways to be better prepared is when you see the warning signs, you have to take immediate action when you start seeing warning signs. When you delay, a big problem becomes a whole lot bigger. And that's why quick, decisive action early makes a huge difference.
And Senator, in terms of preparations, there have been some questions coming in about the status of the fall elections. Do you know anything more in terms of how Michigan residents will be able to vote this fall?
Well, I'm thinking about that a lot. We have to make sure that we still have elections. It's fundamental to our democracy. The Constitution requires it, so we will have to do it. So now, how do we make sure that it's done safely for everybody? We are working on proposals to have vote by mail across the country. A number of states already have exclusive vote by mail. Those systems work very well. Voter turnout tends to be higher. It's easier for people to do that. Voters also tend to have more information if they have time to look over the ballot before they fill it out, and can ask questions before they fill it out. It is a system that works. We would like to see it throughout the country, and have appropriated money in the CARES Act to help local states and secretaries of state and election officials in local states start gearing up for that. But if you look at us here in Michigan, with the proposal passing to allow no reason absentee voting, basically we can have that system here in Michigan. Everybody can request a ballot. It will be sent to their home. They'll fill it out and send it back. We've already seen great success in that program. Previous elections, we've seen a very large surge and increase of people choosing to vote absentee. The upcoming election in May in schools will be done in an absentee basis. So certainly we are pretty well prepared here. I know the Secretary of State Benson's focused on this, the Governor Whitmer's focused on it, but we already have the structure in place and we have the legislation in place that every person in Michigan can vote absentee, and we're going to continue to focus on that.
Senator, we'll try and squeeze in just one or two more questions here. We know you have a tight timeline, and we'll hear briefly from our President and CEO, Diane Keller. But here is a very specific PPP question that asks, as you work on this upcoming legislation, if there's any chance for funding for independent contractors, home-based businesses, and those in the creative industries.
If they have a business, their business could qualify for 7A loans. So is that what the question is? If whether or not they could qualify for those loans?
I believe so. I believe so.
Yeah. Now, if they're an individual too, if individual, they'll have the loan that, and if they're the business owner can have that, they're eligible. I don't know if there's going to be a carve out for that, but they would be eligible. But also, under the Unemployment Act too, if you are a sole proprietor, you can now under unemployment can file for unemployment with the pandemic assistance, and so that would provide. And under the way it works, it's the $600 is on top of what the state pays. And so the state, right now, the state on unemployment, the compensation is anywhere from $150 to $350 a month, depending on what you earned. And then the federal add-on is $600 per week on top of that. So someone would get anywhere between $750 and $950 a week as a sole proprietor or a small business person that suddenly saw their income reduced or eliminated during that time. They could file for unemployment. So that's another option in addition to the PPP.
Senator, one last question, and I'll turn it over to Diane to thank you. This is a short-term issue for many teleworkers is access to reliable, robust, and secure internet connections. This has Homeland Security and business applications. Is there any focus on internet service provider industry to address this concern?
Absolutely. Cybersecurity is, I spend a lot of time thinking about cyber security. I'm on 3 of the 4 Senate committees that deal with it: Armed Services, Commerce, and Homeland Security. We have to strengthen our cyber security throughout the country. And that's broader and through our systems is that, as I'm sure everyone on the call knows, the bad guys out there always look for the weakest link. And that weakest link tends to be our smaller businesses that don't have the resources to have more sophisticated cyber protections within their own individual systems. So we've got to be working to make sure all aspects of that are being taken care of. So we will continue to work on that. We have certainly seen it. We're really front and center here with everybody using all of these new services, and some of these services were designed for convenience. They were not designed to have any kind of security features, and we're starting to see those vulnerabilities come out pretty openly. We've got to close those kinds of vulnerabilities, so that's going to be a continuing, ongoing effort on my part and through my committee work, but we're going to have to be even more intense on it. The one other aspect of that I think is very clear too, and something I am very passionate about and been working on, is to make sure everybody also has access to high-speed internet. You have to have it. It's the equivalent of the last century's electricity. In the last century, we made sure everybody in America had access to electricity, no matter where they lived. We have to do the same thing when it comes to high-speed internet. You need it for your business. You need it for things such as telehealth, which is transformative, where folks, and now when everybody has to stay at home, telehealth is even more important, where you can get access to medical professionals, but do it in the comfort of your own home and the safety of your own home, but you need access to high-speed internet to do it. So this should also be an imperative, is both cybersecurity and access. We need that now more than ever, and I'm certainly going to focus it, and we're going to continue to be pushing that aggressively in the months and years ahead.
Thank you, Senator. And again, to listeners, we will make this recording available. You can also get more information on some of these items at peters.senate.gov or on Twitter at @SenGaryPeters. And at this point, I want to thank the Senator again, but I want to turn it over to Diane Keller, our President and CEO, to thank you formally and conclude our remarks here today. Diane.
Hello, thank you everyone. I appreciate your joining us here today. I would really, especially on behalf of ourselves, the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti Regional Chamber, and Claudia Rast and her amazing team at Butzel Long, we would really like to thank you. I know that you are working tirelessly on our behalf. We appreciate this up to the minute, literally, day by day, what's happening today, what we can expect tomorrow, knowledge of what you are doing on both the state level and the federal level. We appreciate that so very much. And we appreciate the hard work that your team is doing on behalf of our small businesses. If there's anything we can do as a chamber and our community to assist you in this process, our members are always looking for additional ways in which we can engage with your organization. And we appreciate the fact that you are helping our members likewise. So thank you so much. For those of you, I think that you can see on the screen, that's peters.senate.gov/coronavirus for additional information, and as well as our A2YChamber.org. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. We very much appreciate it. And for our attendees, we have another seminar coming up this Wednesday. It's an open forum with the SBDC. They're going to be talking about your most requested questions in answer to a survey that we did a couple weeks ago from the business community. And they will answer things such as the current state of funding, cash flow challenges, strategic steps that your organizations can take to survive, how do you pay employees and navigate unemployment. So those are all questions that will be this Wednesday at 11 a.m. So please be sure to register on our chamber's website, a2ychamber.org. And thank you again for joining us. To Gary Peters, Senator Peters, thank you. And
Thank
to
you.
Claudia Rast and her team, thank you. Have a great day. Stay home, stay safe.
Stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.